Documentaries serve as an educational means to inform the masses, but some filmmakers end up taking a different approach. In a world stranger than fiction, some documentarians push the limits of decency and sanity. Number 10. Homelessness is an ever-growing situation, with many being left on the streets, starving, and without basic human needs despite what is stipulated in the law regarding the right to food and housing. Holes in the safety nets of society take on the shapes of people who've been left to fend for themselves. Numerous documentaries have been created in response to the growing crisis, but still it remains unattended to. Dark Days, Lead Me Home, American Street Kid, Homelessness, The Motel Kids of Orange County, and Under the Bridge, The Criminalization of Homelessness are just a few such documentaries. But one film takes on a seemingly less depressive atmosphere. Carts of Darkness, directed by Murray Seipel, follows the lives of a group of homeless men. Seipel's earlier films concentrated on extreme sports, but when a car accident left him wheelchair-bound, he put the camera down for other pursuits. But with the increase in homelessness awareness and his addiction to adrenaline, Seipel couldn't resist. 8 years after the accident, he met a group of binners, homeless men who make a living collecting bottles that they could redeem for cash at the recycling center. Seipel realized the community that he'd just been presented with and was quick to get to know the men a bit better. He discovered that despite their downtrodden lifestyle, the men had ample time to do things they enjoyed. This included an extreme sport of racing shopping carts down Mountain Highway in a North Vancouver neighborhood. Seipel turns his camera to the three men, including Big Al, a polite red-headed man and an avid kart racer, Fergie, a cynical and quiet man, and Bob, an artist and gardener. Through an initial casual and gentle chat, the layered narrative of each man unfolds. Carts of Darkness lends itself to the racing game that the homeless men find themselves engaged in, despite the risks. With just 1 foot on the cart, limited direction control, and no brakes, the men hit speeds of 70 kilometers an hour down the roadway, ultimately feeding the director's adrenaline addiction. Other racetracks that the men took include Black Mountain, Ladyhawk, Bison, and Alan Boyd of Little Sparta. Seipel, a former snowboarding filmmaker, recognized the same spirit among the men as he'd seen in extreme snowboarders. The similarities were obvious. The documentary delves into the lives of the men, how they ended up in their situation, and the hobbies that they find themselves most satisfied with as they try to make light of their situation. Carts of Darkness was released in 2008 as a National Film Board of Canada documentary. The eye-opening film received the Leo Award for Best Documentary in the Nature, Environment, Adventure, Technology, and Science category. It's unknown as to where Big Al, Fergie, and Bob ended up after the film, but the documentary, like others, sparks hope that someone will do something. Number 9. The United States finds itself home to the ever-growing Flat Earth movement, a community of theorists who believe that the Earth is not spherical, but rather a flat disc shape. The Society of Flat Earthers has gained so much notoriety that a documentary had to be made to uncover the inner works and details of the conspiracy. In 2018, director Daniel J. Clark released Behind the Curve, which details the various perspectives of prominent flat Earth theorists, such as Patricia Steere and Mark Sargent. The documentary also enlists the opinions of astrophysicists from UCLA and Caltech. Behind the Curve isn't a film that laughs at those whose understanding is that the Earth is a sphere, but rather explores the human tendency to construct our own realities beyond the realm of common sense and logic. It traverses the psychology behind the belief in such conspiracy theories, with experts and enthusiasts at its center. Instead of creating a mockery of the people who believe that the Earth is a ball spinning in space, Clark creates a documentary affectionate toward those devoted to their position that the world is a disc. The film focuses mainly on Mark Sargent, an active member of the Flat Earth community, where he discusses his interpretation of the theory and his role as an advocate. Behind the Curve opens on Mark dressed in shorts, a t-shirt, and a baseball hat at his home on Whidbey Island. He wonders that if the world were a globe, then why can't we see the curvature? As a Monty Python fan, he believes that we may be living in a terrarium or a film set, much like Jim Carrey in The Truman Show. Mark believes that we've been conned into thinking that the reality we live in is real. He speaks of mysterious controllers and how NASA is at the center of the con. Even though Clark takes on an initial humanistic approach, he can also see how the subjects of his film may be a danger to themselves and others who they encourage into society. The film soon becomes a point-making documentary about the fragility of belief systems. Also featured in Behind the Curve is a very real clip from the International Flat Earth Conference that was held in North Carolina and attracted hundreds of attendees from all across the globe. Clark makes a point of interviewing some experts for his documentary as well, including Scott Kelly, an astronaut. The film also follows various experiments conducted by flat Earth believers in an effort to test and prove their hypothesis. The results, of course, often prove otherwise and are seemingly discarded. The Flat Earth advocates also speak of the several conferences and meetups that they attend in dedication to their beliefs. The film is a host of some funny, informative, and empathetic moments that doesn't only take on a serious route. Behind the Curve is a humanistic approach to some of the most ridiculed people in America, but the number of followers that the theory finds remains a strange phenomenon. Number 8. Kedi, meaning cats in Turkish, is a documentary set in Istanbul. It's hard to say whether it's about Istanbul cats, or if it's a film about cats that just happens to be set in Istanbul. This distinction, though, is unnecessary. If Kedi is meant as an examination of life in a city, it's fitting since the vision is filtered through the eyes of feline friends. The cats of Istanbul are strewn through the streets, sitting on piers, in doorways, on cafe benches, lying beneath the flea market tables, or leaping up for scraps at the fish markets. The film itself profiles the lives, habits, routines, and personality of 7 stray cats. They're just 7 among thousands who are cared for by the people there. The footage is astounding and must have been quite the feat, given the habit of cats. With specially rigged setups, the filmmakers were able to catch some incredible imagery that depicts the life of the ferals. The opening scene follows a tabby cat stalking the streets for a meal that she can bring home to her kittens, who've been stashed away in a stairwell. Another cat frequents the restaurant near the water, taking care of a rodent problem, while another dominates a busy cafe, fighting off interlopers and pushing her friend out of the way so she can eat first. One Istanbul resident spends much of her day cooking fresh chicken before wandering the neighborhoods, leaving heaps of food for the ferals. But it seems that she isn't the only one looking after the cats there. In fact, it appears as though every resident is playing their part. An older man hurries to the local vet with a seemingly lifeless kitten in his hand. A man who lives on a boat stops ashore to feed a litter of orphaned kittens with an eyedropper, while a baker explains how much the storefront cat enriches the life of the neighborhood. The baker, referring to this very cat, explains that he needed medical care quite recently, and that all the residents there have a running tab with the local vet. One restaurant owner even keeps a tip jar on the front counter, and any funds collected through it go toward the vet visits. The cats and the people of Istanbul coexist in a peaceful way, but with the brutal knocking down of old neighborhoods in the wake of high-rises, concern among the residents is at an all-time high. With such disruptions, what will become of the cats? Where will they go? Caring for animals may be viewed as such a small scene, but Kedi portrays it as one of the most important things in the world. Number 7. Jack Rebney is possibly one of the most famous people that no one has ever heard of. But in a simple search of the angriest man in the world, his name will appear. He cursed his way through Winnebago's sales videos, with his outrageous outtakes becoming a sensation, ultimately propelling him to stardom. Filmmaker Ben Steinbauer, however, couldn't let the comical act become overshadowed, so he embarked on a journey to the mountaintop in search of the recluse who became the unwitting Winnebago man. The documentary of that title reveals the story of Rebney, whose foul-mouthed outbursts were all caught on video, circulated on VHS tapes, and became an internet phenomenon by 2005. Over 20 million people have viewed the viral videos, and it's been regarded as one of the first and funniest virals ever. While on his journey to locate the Winnebago man, Steinbauer, who became obsessed with the viral video, documents his discoveries, releasing it as a documentary film in 2010. Through research, the filmmaker tracks down the original crew of the video, who tells him that this particular shoot was incredibly frustrating for everyone. The outtakes, as funny as they were, led to Rebney being fired, and no one ever saw him again. Steinbauer's adamance of finding him led to a private detective who he hired to track down the Winnebago Man. The documentary reveals that Rebney had been living like a hermit in a remote mountain in California, so the crew headed over to visit the infamous former RV salesman. There, Steinbauer is surprised to find that Rebney is calm and articulate, serving as quite the contrast to the profane, angry individual he appears to be on tape. Rebney tells the filmmaker that he was indifferent and somewhat amused by the video and its popularity. Steinbauer returned home disappointed. This revelation wouldn't make for much of a documentary, but just a week later, Rebney makes contact with him and admits to not being truthful during their encounter. He reveals that he was actually angry about the video and that he didn't want to be remembered this way. It was here that we learn that the Winnebago Man was once a news broadcaster and editor who left the industry due to the decline in real news. The documentary brings us to a second meetup between the two, but Rebney disappears for some time while taking a walk. When Steinbauer eventually heads to the home for a second visit, Rebney reveals that he's legally blind. During this encounter, articulate yet profane interviews are conducted with the Winnebago Man, opting to rant about political speeches on subjects that make him particularly angry, such as Walmart. While this was Steinbauer's documentary, Rebney's ability to demand the attention of the camera made him a star yet again. The Winnebago Man documentary found itself at the top of the charts, with the angriest man in the world being viewed as a hero. Number 6. Diane Morgan, actress and writer, known for her role in Me Before You, Alan Partridge, and Kunk on Shakespeare, allows her alter ego, Philomena Kunk, a posh middle-class woman, to take over in various documentaries, including films and series. In 2024, she released a new documentary called Kunk on Life, which takes Philomena on a journey through the meaning of life and some outlandish interviews with some very real experts who were expecting a serious encounter. Following the worldwide success of Kunk on Earth, Kunk on Life delves into the profound questions of life, examining the confounding subjects from the Big Bang to artificial intelligence. Philomena meets academics and creatives with her misguided observations. The comedic host finds herself asking the question, what's the point of it all? This is a question that makes up a large portion of the film, which humans have been asking themselves since the dawn of time. The documentary opens with Philomena, in all seriousness, asking, "Ever wondered what all these forests, valleys, mountains, and puddles are actually for? Wondered how many buildings were knocked down to make way for them?" The documentary explores the moments as Philomena travels down the road of quantum physics, existentialism, nihilism, hedonism, and other isms. She also goes down the paths of the Big Bang, biology, morals, meditation, and the art of AI. In the quest for answers, she will examine some of the world's foremost thinkers and interview a variety of leading experts, not allowing them to leave until she's gotten to the bottom of the meaning of life and why we're bothering to even find out. Philomena's bizarre questions render many genuine experts speechless, grappling for answers or staring at her wide-eyed. These experts often look half frightened of her, understandably so. The questions certainly intrigue the experts as well as the viewers at home, such as, did God have a brother called Simon? Aren't knees a con? And do I have DNA? The film is divided into various chapters, including those on religion and art, during which she declares that Van Gogh's paintings are bad. The hour-long movie combines facts, gags, and elaborate overdone scenes, as well as random inserts of Pump Up the Jam and Diane Morgan's Aunt Carol. It's hard to understand how many of the interviewees kept a straight face during the oddball moments, which are delivered with dryness and absolute sincerity. When they agreed to be interviewed, they had no idea what they were in for, but they attempt to answer the questions as best they could. The documentary takes on very much the same pattern as Kunk on Earth, which also sees several interviews with unsuspecting experts. Number 5. In 1981, one of the most popular arcade games was released. It was Donkey Kong, the rampaging ape who barrels down the platforms towards Jumpman. After first appearing on the arcade machines, multiple sequels of Donkey Kong emerged, also sparking the highest score competitions in the arcades. The game features a simple premise. Users play as Jumpman with the goal of saving Pauline from the giant ape. The game has been praised as being one of the most challenging games of its era, and in the early 1980s, Billy Mitchell, a king of classic arcade games, gained the highest record. For 25 years, his high record stood unbeaten at the time of the scoreboard until Steve Wiebe came along. The King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters, followed Steve's attempt at pushing Mitchell from the first place down to second. The offbeat 2007 documentary film, directed by Seth Gordon, revealed an unexpected cutthroat and odd fascination with the world of competitive arcade gaming. It's a world where gamers dedicate much of their days and nights to achieving world record status. This is precisely what the King of Kong documentary captures. The out-of-work engineer, Steve, opted to buy a Donkey Kong cabinet, with the will to break the record. He would make use of his mathematical knowledge in an effort to identify the game's exploitable patterns. This propels him to 1,006,600 points, the first score ever to go over a million. Steve was over the moon and quickly submitted a tape to Twin Galaxies, an organization dedicated to tracking high scores in arcade games. Mitchell and Twin Galaxies, though, don't believe the score and decided to send out 2 referees to investigate the cabinet. They discovered that the circuit board was provided by Roy Schilt, who claims the high score for Missile Command. Wiebe, however, was unaware that Mitchell and Schilt had been at odds after Mitchell questioned the high score, leading to a disqualification. It was for this reason that the organization believed that Wiebe's circuit board was tampered with by Schilt and refused to recognize his record. So the out-of-beat documentary sends him to a tournament at Fun Spot in New Hampshire. Again, he attempts to reach another high score, this time doing it live for the high-ranking Twin Galaxies members. It was also here that he would channel the Donkey Kong 25-year champ, who refused the challenge. Before the crowd, much to everyone's shock, Wiebe set the high score of 985,600, ending the game. This was a new high score. Much to Wiebe's dismay, though, Mitchell would send out a low-quality VHS to Fun Spot, revealing his new, even higher score of 1,047,200. And Twin Galaxies reveres him as the record holder, despite concerns over the video's authenticity. Wiebe was adamant about becoming the King of Kong, and 9 months later, he attended a tournament hosted by Twin Galaxies. This time, the tournament takes place in Mitchell's hometown, serving as an opportunity for Wiebe to challenge him again, this time in a public competition. But again, he refuses. The documentary follows the gamer through the challenge, leading to another disappointment. He was unable to pass the record. Wiebe's integrity, though, does lead him to an invite. Walter Day, founder of Twin Galaxies, acknowledges the man's perseverance and invites him to submit tape scores. Day told the gamer that he was definitely one of the top players and that they would be honored to receive his scores anytime. While the documentary was expected to have a much different ending, with Wiebe holding the new high record, this isn't what happened. The end of King of Kong showed him with his family after the days of the documentary were coming to a close. Disappointment filled the air, but Wiebe was still glad to have accomplished as much as he had. 11 years later, in a surprising twist, Twin Galaxies discovered that the record holder, Billy Mitchell, had in fact cheated, leading Wiebe to become the new record holder with 985,600 points, finally beating Mitchell and becoming the King of Kong. Number 4. The Terry Zwigoff documentary, Crumb, premiered in 1994. Quickly gaining critical acclaim for the raw portrayal of a controversial artist, Robert Crumb. The cartoonist, R. Crumb, as he so signed his work, is an American counterculture comic book illustrator as well as a social satirist. He's well known for his characters Fritz the Cat and Mr. Natural, with a drawing style influenced by early cartoonists such as Carl Barks. The documentary film delves into a rather fascinating underground world of comics. It highlights the counterculture movement of the 60s and 70s, shedding light on the unconventional perspectives and artistic expressions of the artist. With its unfiltered approach to its subject, along with the talent of Crumb, the documentary became an important piece in filmmaking and underground art. The dive into the cartoonist's life serves as an extraordinary yet incredibly strange film. The Crumb documentary centers around not only the artworks and comics, but also the upbringing and family, from which some odd narratives begin to emerge, namely over his two brothers. The film portrays its subject as an outcast in school, one who finds himself often rejected by the women he adores, only to become a massive success years later. With comics featuring some explicit and offensive elements, questions arise as to how they even went into print in the first place. But the elements are all products of his mind, which holds on to the reject mentality. During the filming, which took 6 years to complete, Zwigoff faced several challenges, one of which was Crumb's resistance to reveal certain aspects of his life. But the documentary does disclose the strangeness of his two brothers, Charles and Maxon, both of whom are talented artists who too face some personal issues. Many viewers of the documentary comment on these two peculiar individuals who are both mentally ill and appear to be criminally insane. What strikes many viewers the most is that Crumb himself also appeared to have such internal strife, which he channeled into his cartoons. As for Charles and Maxon, who knows where their internal issues were directed to? The cartoonist, as many have come to realize, finds himself tied up in the fine line between genius and insane, making for a fascinating subject for a documentary. One peculiar aspect of the film also stayed with those who watched it. It was a pirate comic made by one of the brothers that seemingly shows how they devolve and get more insane as it progresses. This part of the film was the most chilling, as it appears that his sanity completely vanished from the pages. Another aspect that stands out is the tactic that Crumb employs during some of the family conversations. During these interviews, he smiles or laughs in an effort to diffuse the situation and redirect the conversation. The documentary also captures another odd aspect of the Crumb family. During these interviews, each family member appeared to have the same mannerisms and voice, and even the same cadence of speech. It was thought that they were different personas of the cartoonist, but they were very real individuals, each of whom contributed to the life of Robert Crumb and his bizarre comics. Number 3. Cars twist down a winding suburban English street in the opening and again at the close of The Moon and the Sledgehammer. Set in the rural parts of Sussex, the film takes on a less contemporary orientation. But this is due to the subjects of the documentary, the Page family, who led an isolated and defiant pre-modern life. As the camera pans past the rushing cars and pop music blares in the background, it lunges into a wooded area at the edge of the road. The foliage rustles and reveals an odd scene littered with giant spanners, a discarded bike, and a primitive-looking cottage. The peaceful chirps of birds overhead are interrupted by a shattering bang, revealing the home of the Page family, where there's no electricity and no running water. It was here that Oily Page lived with his 4 grandchildren in an 1869 lifestyle. While many would describe them as hippies who've gone off the grid, the documentary paints them otherwise. They're the last members of a community that was driven out by the making of modern machinery. After having been released to the public eye, the film quickly became a cult classic over the decades. But past the murmur of the traction engines that Page drives through the woods, there are questions that have yielded no answers. Where's Mrs. Page? And why are the adult offspring still living with their father? The Moon and the Sledgehammer not only offers a view of the rural pre-modern ways of living, but also brings the troubling aspects of the old country ways into consideration. Troubling aspects include the way in which Father Page controls his daughters, Nancy and Kathy, and how they appear trapped. The creator also explored the idea of a secret relationship that appeared to blossom between Kathy and her brother Jim, who sang a love song to her. Looking back on his documentary, the creator wished that he'd asked more questions. The family was nothing short of odd, with Mr. Page loving being in front of the camera, instilling the belief that he was once a circus performer. It was this man, as flawed as he was at the helm of the family, directing his 2 daughters and 2 sons into becoming the self-sufficient people that we see them as in the film. The documentary reveals a woodland that was theirs and theirs alone, exploring the experiences of man-powered steam-driven wonder. With only natural light at their disposal, the film crew captured the heavy metal, rusted spanners, car carcasses, embroidered doilies, and perfectly pruned roses, summing up the simple life of the Page family, living a life of defiant freedom. The film serves as an inspiration not only to the director, but to those who watched it and those who sought an off-grid life before the modern era. Every viewer, though, was left with the question as to what became of the pre-modern Page family. Mr. Page unfortunately did not live a lengthy life, and Peter, the oldest son, passed away in his 80s. Despite being closed off from most of society, they were loved by the locals, and when Peter passed, the village decorated a steam engine with flowers, and everyone followed it through the town. Nancy and Kathy moved to a council house and engaged in sales. Jim remained in the woods, though for a bit, but when the director returned some 20 years later, he found it completely run down. The only evidence of the Pages' strange lifestyle is the Moon and the Sledgehammer documentary film, and the old carcasses of cars and metal that have since been overtaken by nature. Number 2. Catfish, the 2010 documentary film, serves as a cautionary tale about the kindling of online romance. The term catfish or catfishing refers to a person who's making use of a fake identity to trick you into believing that they're real for their own personal gain. A catfish can either scam you for money, groom you into sending them explicit images or texts, blackmail you, or even steal your identity. A successful catfish makes use of several steps, creating a fake account, sending photos, flattering their victim, and finally asking for something. The film Catfish centers around this very activity that one unsuspecting individual, Nev Schulman, found himself engaged in. The documentary opens in a Manhattan office with the victim, his sister Ariel, and Henry Joost. These three individuals would make their professional videos and take professional pictures of modern dancers. What seemed like a mundane life, though, soon turned into an alarming event. Nev had received a painting of one of the photographs that he had taken. It was from a young girl, a dancer named Abby Pierce. Abby's mother, Angela, and Nev, a wholesome and somewhat naive man, soon became acquainted through emails. He was moved by the painting that Abby had done, which seemed much too advanced for her age. Soon, the photographer finds himself identifying the whole family. He learns about school plans, pie baking, and even learns about Sunday family breakfasts. Nev was also told about Megan, also a dancer, and Abby's 19-year-old sister who was buying a horse farm. It didn't take long for Megan and Nev to kindle a cyber romance, wondering if they were meant for each other. There were various pictures of the young woman on her Facebook, and since other family members spoke of her regularly, including Abby and Angela, she must have been real. As the online romance between the two unfolds, Henry and Ariel begin to document the entire escapade. As the two fell in love, Megan regularly sent him pictures of Abby's paintings, only furthering the adoration and playing on Nev's naivety. But concern began to boil when an idea popped into Nev's mind. Is Megan really who she says she is? Trust was built up in a matter of moments between them, but it was shattered in a mere minute and a hasty decision when the catfishing victim found himself traveling across the United States to Michigan. Nev wanted to surprise his online girlfriend and determine if she was real. As the team arrived in the rural town, they discovered something truly haunting. Every interaction that Nev had with the Pierce family was a mere fabrication. The personas of Megan, Abby, and Angela were all created by Angela herself, a middle-aged mother of 2 disabled children who needed constant care. Angela was a lonely woman and a blogger who exploited Nev's care and love for her. His entire world was shattered when he learned that the woman that he'd fallen in love with wasn't real. The documentary highlights the issue of identity theft and impersonation. It also showcased how easy it was for Angela to steal others' work online, including songs that she had sent to Nev, which she pirated off of YouTube, and the supposed paintings done by Abby that she took from Pernilla Pramberg's blog. For 8 months of Facebook posting, phone conversations, and G-chat, Nev found himself embroiled with the family and deeply connected with a particular woman who he believed was real, only to have the entire network he'd grown accustomed to shattered. Number 1. In a land so vast and filled to the brim with alternating cultures, it comes as no shock that there lie many hidden secrets within them. As much as we would like to be all-knowing, some unseen cultural practices should remain just that. David Farrier, a New Zealand journalist and actor, however, decided that this shouldn't be the case, and opted to journey through various continents, visiting many cultures through a docuseries that he titled Dark Tourist. This isn't the first documentary he was known for, though, but he's also engaged in other bizarre real-life films such as Mr. Organ and Tickled. With episodes exploring haunted forests and nuclear lakes, Dark Tourist blasted into the eyes of the public back in 2018. Farrier begins his journey in Latin America, where he meets Pablo Escobar's enforcer in Colombia, discussing a rags-to-riches history of the narcotic kingpin. The episode reveals how Escobar's life started with acts of thievery before propelling to wealth through brutality. Escobar's former hitman, Popeye, casually accompanies Farrier as well, who refers to him as the ultimate narco tour guide. Popeye took a lot of lives, which certainly made for a chilling and awkward episode, fitting well with the docuseries title. Farrier later travels to Mexico in the same episode, with his wish to see Santa Muerte, an extreme cult that's been banned from the mainstream churches. It was here that the tourist would also witness a supposed exorcism. This wasn't the end of the Latin American episode, though. Farrier decided to wrap it up with an illegal border crossing in an effort to showcase what happens to real illegal migrants, revealing the threats and dangers they may be met with. In the second episode, the tourist finds himself venturing to Japan, in a town that was hit by heavy radiation. Fukushima was struck by a large earthquake followed by a tsunami, leading to a nuclear event. On this tour, though, Farrier finds himself accompanied by other nuclear tourists on a bus who may be traveling through contaminated areas, putting their lives at risk. A tour guide, Yo, assures their confidence through a joke of not growing extra horns or extra fingers. The documentary takes an even darker turn when they arrive at the abandoned town, turning a tour into an apocalyptic film. After noting that the radiation reading spiked to 0.75, higher than the area around Chernobyl, Farrier concludes that the nuclear tourism may not be such a great idea after all. The Dark Tourist also takes us to a robot hotel, a quirky place run only by robots. In a special feature, one of the robots sings Twinkle Twinkle Little Star for Farrier at night, a lullaby that sends him off to sleep. In the third episode, we find that the tourist's next stop is the United States, where he embarks on a Jeffrey Dahmer tour, takes the JFK motorcade around, and meets supposed vampires. Farrier quickly discovers that the homicidal maniac has quite the fan base, and even runs into a supposed psychic waving rods around and claiming to have the ability to speak to Dahmer. As he travels to New Orleans, Farrier has another unexpected run-in, this time with self-proclaimed vampires. He meets a man named Maven who sells fangs for a living, and when asked if he's a vampire, Maven asks, would a predator tell its prey what it is? As the docuseries pressed on, Farrier soon learned that these nuclear adventures weren't over yet, and he headed to Kazakhstan for even more nuclear tourism, with radiation readings even higher than that of Fukushima. He also visits an orphanage where he encounters people with disabilities, as a direct result of the nuclear event. Europe was Farrier's next stop, where he visited a forbidden city and a rather disturbing museum. In the village of Little Dean is the Jail Crime Museum, which is twisted and downright disturbing, and has even been described as one of the most offensive places that any tourist can ever visit. Famagusta, the ghost city of Cyprus, the supposed forbidden city, leaves silence in the wake of the Turkish invasion of 1974. The once flourishing city of 40,000 inhabitants was reduced to zero. After having been fenced off, journalists were banned from ever entering, but this didn't stop Farrier from investigating it. For his next stop, the Dark Tourist headed to Southeast Asia to test the limits of morality. The tourist visits the empty capital of Myanmar and witnesses an Indonesian harvest ritual affiliated with the Toraja rainforest. The docuseries takes us down steep roads into the macabre without being too invasive. Ferrier himself learned many things on the journey, highlighting the various disturbing aspects of several cultures and different places in the world. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.